With so many of us having to adapt to different ways of living and working during the COVID-19 pandemic, James and I are having regular UX Podcast Fika breaks, a live 30-minute chat. Visit uxpodcast.com/fika to find out when.
UX Podcast Episode 237.
Hello everybody, welcome to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, James Royal Lawson
and Per Axbom,
with listeners in 194 countries from Hong Kong to Afghanistan.
Mar Murube is a design and user research consultant based in London. Her recent projects have included, amongst others, working for Camden Council and their Good Work Camden initiative.
And that work with Camden Council has involved a number of rounds of user interviews, some of which had to be conducted after the outbreak of COVID-19.
Mar joins us to share her experiences from those interviews and talk about how we can prepare ourselves when conducting research.
So, Mar, can you just describe for us, or tell us a little bit about the interview you carried out a few weeks ago and what happened?
So it wasn't just one interview. So I've been doing this piece of work with Camden Council and speaking to residents that are newly vulnerable. So people that maybe before they weren't identified as vulnerable, but now they're in a more vulnerable situation. And that can really just be anyone, it can be you or me or just someone who's going through a rough patch, and with everything that's going on, your life just gets worse. So I was doing this piece of research for this program and just trying to understand, we're trying to launch something to help people basically have access to better work in the council.
Oh, this was a system, this is a program to try and give more digital support to people who are unemployed.
Well, yes, that, and also give them training. It's also working with businesses in the borough. It's working with employers and just trying to, create better work. So not just having, a gig economy type of work, but also having work that's going to be good for the person in the long term and also for the business, and trying to create that inclusive richness, inclusive economy, and trying to grow things. So it's a really, really lovely program. It's something really, positive. But obviously that means that we needed to have a lot of input, and the way I structured the research was having a bit of, in the beginning, having a bit more of open-ended questions, and a bit more explorative, a bit more like you were doing a discovery, and then testing some of the assumptions and ideas that we had. So a very simple format, and I've been speaking with lots of people, and I think the situation, why this is special is because it's, on the one hand, it's remote. So that's always harder. So I had done remote interviews before and remote user testing, remote card sorting before. But it's harder, I think, if the people aren't used to, and also you have the whole thing of the pandemic, the health crisis that's going on with COVID-19. So those two things combined.
Did you start this research in person and then get kind of forced to move over to doing it remotely?
Yes, we started in person. We started interviewing people face to face and actually having some physical artifacts, and then we had to, I think, after 1 or 2 weeks. The next round of research, we had to do it remotely. So we had to very quickly set up, we started using Google Meets, started using things like Mural, and, just very quickly trying to adapt what we had, because we still wanted to get those insights. There was still value in doing it, but we just couldn't be face to face. The situation in England, we have been in a lockdown, and people have been advised not to travel if possible, not to go to work, and it's both sides. It's for us, but it's also a risk for these people. So we moved on to the digital world.
And your target audience for these interviews, like you say, there were vulnerable people or people who maybe are at risk of losing their jobs
Yes.
prior to COVID-19, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, this whole thing just made it worse. And for example, we were talking with some people who maybe they were self-employed, and they were doing some gig work here and there, very varied, and they were getting by. And with the whole COVID-19, it just means like it's gone completely dry. They're not getting any work at all. They're going through very difficult time because also they're not like officially employed. I mean, it just depends. Like we had a lot of different situations. We had people who had been looking for a job, and obviously they had to stop when all of this started. So really really different. And then also I don't know. I mean, I think the interview that we're talking about, where I think there was this situation, the person on the other end just started. I mean, just started crying. It was quite impactful, and I think that was just because they started talking, describing everything that they were going through. And a lot of times, I think we don't really reflect on what's going on. So we tend to just, do the things, and you don't really hear your own narrative about the events. And I think when you're in an interview, you're having to explain someone about your life, about what you do, where you live, your situation, and it just becomes too much. So it's obviously this person then she became overwhelmed, and it just we had a moment there, and I'd really for me it was a bit confusing, because obviously I was trying not to be leading, I was trying not to be encouraging, in a way, or trying to affect what was going to happen. I was trying to it's really hard, because you have your discussion guide, and you want to stick, you want to kind of return to the path that you have, but then on the other end you're having to say, well, there's a person here, and they're going through these, and it's screw everything. I need to be here for this person. So I was recording it, and I turned everything off, and we just talked. And I try not to give any advice, because I'm not qualified to do that. But I think just being there and being able to listen to what they were going through, I think that was quite useful. And then after that, the first thing I did was I spoke with people within my team, and I said, "Woof, like this has just happened," and just trying to relieve, because I think you're getting then all that load, and it's just trying to share. And then I also wrote something about it, and people were super amazing, responsive. Everyone sent me links, articles, things that you can do. And then I put together just like a really short guide, of what to do in these type of situations. And this is just like for internal for our team, but it's like what to do now that we're carrying research in these times, how can we prepare ourselves? Because 90% of doing something successfully is preparing for it. So what can you do beforehand? What can you do during the interview? And then what can you do once you leave them? And
But going back to the actual interview. So what did you feel during that moment? What did you feel that you handled well, and what went less well during that moment when you were there with that person?
I think what went less well, or what I would have liked to do different, was maybe just trying to stick, to the discussion guide, and trying to. But I mean, I didn't for a long time. But just trying to be professional me, rather than more human me. But I think just switch naturally. So I feel a lot of empathy when I'm speaking with people, and given everything, I think I handled it quite well.
Do you think that we should remain detached during these kind of research situations?
I think so. I think we need to be there for the persons. I think we need to hold space. And what I don't think we should do, and it's the part that it's really hard for me, is saying, well, I actually getting too involved, and telling them about your own personal problems, which is something that maybe with a friend I would do, like if I was talking with a friend, I would say, oh yes, something similar happened to me, or I know someone, or just maybe even giving more advice. Or it's less of a, when you're interviewing someone, and I'm sure you know this from the podcast, it's like you have to let the other person talk, and I think that can be very heavy, for some people. I think it's more natural when it's a conversation, and someone says something, and then the other person says something else, and I think obviously when you're doing user research, that's not something that you would do, right? We even use silence in a strategic way, to get people to talk, to get people to tell us more about them and about the situation. So I think then it's really hard, like, because also these people, they're not really your friends, you don't know anything about them, they don't know anything about you, and it's a professional relationship. So I think it's having those boundaries, and saying, how can I be of help? How can I give something to this person? If they need space, if they need to talk with someone, if they need to be listened, how can I be there without judging, and just give them something, because I really want to help them. But then at the same time, it's like, how do I not, become involved, like too involved? Because obviously, if I didn't have any of this, I would say, yeah, let's talk on the phone or something. But it's hard, you see, and also like you can't just do that.
Have you had anything similar happen previously, like in face-to-face interviews or research? Have you had similar things happen, or was this the first time?
So yeah, I've had like so I've worked before doing research with sensitive, around sensitive topics, and like mental health and addictions, and there have been some situations which were maybe a bit more tense, or you could feel what the other person was feeling. That's why I also think that the fact that we're doing this remotely, you can't really see what the other person is doing, and it's just like another barrier that you have there. So before, yes, I had some things like that, but it was never so extreme. It was always, I think also it was handled different. I think you can also measure how the other person is doing better.
Because to me, it sounds like you handled it extremely well. It sounds, but like you were perhaps unprepared for it, but you had I mean, you're an experienced researcher, obviously, so you're always aware that something could happen, something could go wrong, and you sort of have to be flexible around what's going on. And there's this boundary, of course,
Yeah.
always when you're doing an interview.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like I said, it's I think the heartbeat, and I'm sure you guys can understand, is like you
Yeah.
always want to do more. So you always want to, and you always want to say, well, what could I have done, that I didn't do? I think, and that's one of the things that I've changed after this call, and after everyone just gave me all this advice, is I now have like more resources, So for example, if I'm interviewing people that are, I know because of where they're coming from, that they're having some problems around domestic violence, or some kind of issues around that, then I have like resources to put them in touch and say, well, you should contact all these people and they're going to help you. And then at least you're giving them like a next step of action, or if they're going through any other problem, and the good thing is that working for a local government, they have a lot of services that people can use, and then it's at least you're helping them a bit more. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's that thing about wanting to help people, and saying there's only so much I can do. I mean, that's the whole thing about empathy.
Yeah, I think that is excellent advice, that when you do go into research interviews, that you always have with you a collection of resources to share. Like I guess this is, we've seen nowadays, if an article is news article is talking about maybe someone well known who's taken their own life, then there's a code of conduct now in amongst media organisations, where at the end of the article they will always give links and phone numbers to suicide charities and hotlines, because it's been shown that there's always a spike, there's generally a spike in copycat situations of people that are vulnerable straight after one of these well publicised media profiles, if one of these tragically happens. Now I've realised that we should put something at the end of this show because we're talking about this.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it will vary a lot. So I think, in order to be useful, the advice needs to also be specific. So you have to know what the person is going through. Otherwise, it will be too broad. Yeah, and also, I mean, I think, luckily the type of things that I'm hearing from research with residents at the moment, they're not as extreme I mean, you never know, but for the moment, there are more things like they're not having they can't access the food they need, or they're being cut out, from their families, or they don't have, they don't have any help with around childcare. It's also like the climate of insecurity. I think, that's also really, really heavy, and that's for everyone, really. I think what we're going through, it's really, I don't want to say the word unprecedented, because everyone keeps saying that these are unprecedented times, and it's just fucking hard. It's just really, really hard.
But I think though we've got to look or consider the fact that probably how we talk to users in these interview situations might well change now for quite a sustained period of time. So some of the skills that maybe we haven't had previously, or maybe haven't been as warmed up with, are going to get thrown to the forefront now. This unknown amount of time going forward.
We don't know how long any of this is going to last. But obviously, I think we need to consider, like that when we're asking people things and we're letting them talk, it's almost like, it's almost like you're taking on a therapist role, But I'm not a therapist. I'm just a user researcher, trying to get some insights for my team, so we can help better. So I mean, maybe we should do more training around that. Maybe we should, try to see how we can be of more help, because also, I mean, I've worked with many, many user researchers, and while there are some traits which are common, like, they're all like highly empathic people and they like to listen, but, like we're all very different as well. So maybe, I mean, if I was a different person, I would have handled this different. I mean, some people, don't want to say especially men, but, especially men, like, if they see people crying, they just completely, like they can, they can block or it's like we're all different. So I think we need to have some kind of guidelines on how to react in situations like this, and how to be of help.
But it's so hugely important what you've been saying several times now, actually, that I've heard. It's not your job to give advice, and that is so important for so many researchers out there to realize. But I think there is a very real danger that with all this empathy that you will want to give advice, and in that situation you can put yourself in all sort of problematic situations if you start giving advice. So I agree with all the training that has to happen here, and the talking about it long before it happens.
Yeah, I think an important point here, Paris, is like Mara said about that. We're not trained as therapists or counsellors. Whereas you're ending up in a situation where you do need to be a trained counsellor. Now, counselling, that training is special and very detailed. And just conducting the interview like you do at first, and then switching to a counsellor role, you can't do that. You shouldn't do it, rather.
No, you shouldn't.
So I guess you're going to need. You need, because you risk making potentially the problem worse. So I guess what we're looking for here, what we're talking about, is a special kind of training for researchers that allows you to deal with these situations in a neutral way, as in a way that's going to not make things worse. But at the same time, not maybe make things better, because you're not trained to do that job. It is a difficult one, this.
It is. And also I think, maybe, I mean, looking at the recent past, or looking maybe at the past 10 years, like you were doing research, and if, for example, if I was working for some kind of Uber or, some kind of tech company, I wouldn't necessarily be dealing with vulnerable people. But now, because of the situation, I mean, it doesn't really matter which field or which type of product you're doing research for. Like, everyone is more susceptible of going through challenging times. So I think we need to be prepared. And I absolutely think, I agree with you, like this should be part of the basic training that we get as researchers, or, I mean, there are lots of stuff on the web, but I just think, like, maybe we just need to make that, a bit more, take responsibility and say, if this happened to me, I mean, if someone listening to this podcast today, they're doing user research, and if something like this happened to them, how would they react? So maybe just take 5 minutes to think about that, and the things that you would do. What would you want to do, and what would you not want to do?
That's really good. I think one of the articles you linked to from your own article about this was I think you had the title "Putting Your Own Mask On First Before
Yes.
Helping Others." The thing that you always read when we used to fly in airplanes, and that though was it made me think that's an excellent point, because
Yeah.
what we need to think about here is making sure you as the interviewer are in a good place to deal with this as well. It's not just about the person at the other end who's clearly a bit traumatized and needs some maybe more professional counselling. You need to have help dealing with this emotionally and putting yourself in a good place, so that you can recover from that interview, and also so you can be healthy going into the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things, when I said at the beginning, like I have a few steps, which I'll be sharing these after, but it's basically, first of all, when you schedule the interviews, you need to allow more time between interviews. So maybe, if in a normal day you would speak with 3 or 4 users, so just make it less and allow more time so you can go back to yourself, after you have each of these sessions. And then also, so that's before. And then also after, I think you need to do something, whatever brings you back to your own space, So whether that is going for a walk, talking to a friend, doing meditation, going for a run, but you need to, because otherwise, I tend to speak with, I don't know, maybe between 5 and 15, users when I'm doing qualitative studies. And if you speak to that much amount of people, and then you don't really let that out, you're just like keeping stuff to yourself and hearing all these stories, and you need to also look after yourself.
Being aware of safeguarding policies, recognizing effects of burnout and trauma. There's this excellent staircase with tips that you have in your article on Medium. There's so much in there with regards to understanding yourself, but also having this recognizing when to step in, when to interrupt and break the interview, stop recording. How do I end the interview if it's too emotionally taxing for myself? There's so many things.
So, sorry, I keep interrupting, but that's also something super important. When you're doing research, usually you would always do this. You tell people at the beginning, you're in control of this. We can stop at any point. If anything makes you feel uncomfortable, I can go back, delete it. Like you want to make them feel like they can decide. And I think we need to, as we go through the interview, we need to keep on reminding them of that. And it's almost like, saying you're doing us a huge favor, just by taking part in this session, and we can stop this anytime, and just make them know that they can do that. I think it's important to keep going back to that, and keep. It's not giving them permission, but it's just saying, you can do that, and you don't need to answer everything that I ask you, and we can move on. We can skip questions and just keep going to that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking, like, a lot of times, it's just like something as simple as, tell me a bit about yourself, which is like the first question I always ask is like, right, so tell me a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and just something like that, it can provoke so many different questions on different people. It's amazing.
One thing that strikes me as well about thinking about just this particular case where you're researching for people who are maybe going to be using an employment-related service, that the fact that they have so much kind of they'll get upset, or they've got their anxiety levels are up, or all these kind of things are actually really valuable inputs to judging the importance and knowing what you need to do. So there is yet another aspect to this, is that you've got the big red button you need to press when clearly the person's too emotional to force an interview to go on. But at the same time, it's important research to know just how traumatized maybe or frustrated they are about some of these aspects, to make sure you do improve them and have the right data to improve them.
It is, but I wouldn't want to push that or lead the conversation in any way. I think it's a valuable insight, but I definitely I wouldn't want to be asking things that are going to be making people uncomfortable, because I think it's more around just giving them the space they need to express whatever they're going through at that point. Another thing that's also really, really useful when we're interviewing people in these situations is, just to take the tension away. Sometimes it's to go to artifacts, or if you have like any kind of, I mean, if this was like a real face-to-face thing, I would use something like prototype cards, some kind of card sorting or something that directs the attention away from the subject. I think we can still do that. If we're doing remotely, you can say, well, look at this screen, or we're just trying to make it a bit easier for them. Give them some space to breathe as well. To go back into themselves.
That's actually made me think of the use of glove puppets
Oh.
on video links to get children to talk. Kids will talk more to a glove puppet than they would to a adult or a human.
I mean, I don't know. It's how do we do that? I don't know, but I think that's what would be great.
I'm not suggesting, Mal, that you do that in your next round. I think maybe it won't work in your context.
But it's the point about the artifact. I think it's really important that you have something else to talk about. I mean, that works in all contexts within UX, I think, which is really good. So for me, I recognize now when you're talking about this that it seems like it doesn't always have to end either with always just breaking the interview. It can also be questions. Do you want to take 5 minutes to breathe? Do you want to reschedule? So there are so many options available.
Yeah, that's what we did with that session. Obviously we couldn't continue that day, but then we rearranged it for another. And that's because the person wanted, they were really happy with what, with the project, what they were seeing, and they wanted to help us. So I think that's also something that you can do. You can offer them that possibility and say, do you want to do this again, or do you just want to stop? And again, it's putting them in control.
And that also gives you opportunity to if they do want to follow up and reschedule, then you can gather together some resources that you can make sure you give them in conjunction with the follow-up chat.
Yeah, no, it's something to think about. I mean, I think, James, like you said before, this is going to change the way we work, I think, going forward. And, and we need to be more prepared.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your stories and experiences with us today, Mar.
Well, thank you so much for listening. And, I hope it's useful for the people that are listening to the podcast. I love the podcast. So yeah, can't wait to see the next episode.
So what was going through my head throughout the interview was that we're thinking about how to prepare for the unexpected. And in a sense, of course, then that means it's impossible because the unexpected is always unexpected. So we have to prepare for what we will be unprepared for. How do we work that into research education? And how do we work that into how we talk to others about conducting interviews and teach it to others? It's really difficult. I mean, you are going to find yourself in these situations and where you have to be extremely respectful of other people and realize that you don't have all the answers for them.
I think what's important there is exactly like you said. You can't prepare for an infinite number of unknown situations, but the common thing in all these situations is going to be you're there. You're doing the interview, which, going back to the bit we talked about with putting your own mask on first, the key thing is going to be that you need to know how to look after yourself, because you are the one that's always going to be in that interview because you're conducting them. So if you learn more about what process you need to have to reset after an interview, calm yourself down, shake things off, not be too emotionally lost in these interviews for too long.
And don't book too many of them back to back. You need that recovery time, or you have to expect to need recovery time.
At the same time, though, I think it's we mentioned that one thing you could do is, if you are going into a particular set or series of interviews, you know what the rough topic is about, so you can collect together the latest support lines or help things, or you can make sure you know what is likely to be something that comes up, even if, like you said, Per, that you can't know for sure that's exactly what will come up.
And it can come up with any topic because you never know what state of mind people are in. I think the piece of advice that resonated most with me, and that I haven't actually applied enough, is what I realized is that before even starting the interview, to advise the person that they can always choose to stop the interview at any time for whatever reason. It's not up to me; it's up to them. They're there to help me, and I'm okay with them stopping if they don't feel comfortable for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I actually chatted to my sister, who's a professional counsellor, and asked her a little bit about what do we as accidental counsellors need to do to minimise the damage effectively. Because this, when it boils down to it, you aren't their therapist. You aren't going to be this person's counsellor that you're interviewing. You're talking to them for a fixed amount of time, one-off thing. You're doing research, so it is damage limitation. And if you've got to remember that you're not going to fix them, and you need to give them that respect and that opportunity, exactly like you said. Make sure you open the door for them to stop the interview, cancel it, or not go into subjects or places that they're not prepared to talk about yet. I think another thing my sister said was about acknowledging when they do get into difficulty, or they are going through some emotional expression of what they've been through themselves. Acknowledge that it is difficult, and you understand that it's difficult for them to talk about it.
Yeah. Affirm their emotions and feelings, because they're always valid.
And respect their boundaries, because it's their stories, their life.
And I mean, I can certainly see the dangers here when you have someone who maybe has only booked 4 or 5 interviews, and they're relying, I have this date, I need to get this date. If this interview fails, i.e. I don't get the date I want from it, then I won't have enough to go on with my project. So I can see the dangers in thinking that your needs go before their needs. I think that's what you need to actually find that balance, in that it's always the needs of the person you're interviewing. They are the ones who are actually doing something and going out of their way to help you. So you can never demand more of them than should be expected.
During the interview, you're right. I mean, you've got to respect them foremost in the interview. But going back to what we said, after the interview, it's about you.
Yes, very good point, yes.
Making sure you take care of your own health and your own state of mind. Because like I said, you're not going to be able to fix them. You're not their therapist.
Right. I guess that would be a recommendation for if you work in a team, that you have debriefing sessions, if not after each interview, at least end of day or something like that, when you talk about what you've been through, which will also help others be better prepared, in that they have also understood what could happen.
Yeah, that's excellent advice, and I know counsellors and psychologists, therapists, part of the professional code of conduct for all those people is that they have counselling therapy sessions themselves as part of their debriefing, part of their getting rid of all this that they've had to soak up during their work.
Yeah. So we did talk a while back to someone who's been through a lot of interviews and research situations, who even wrote a book about it, and that is Steve Portigal, of course. And we interviewed him back in, when was it?
Episode 149.
Wow.
Which is when he released War Stories, which is a collection of stories that Steve has gathered from people who've done research over the years and had stories to tell, both good and bad. And what we talk about in that podcast interview is just the benefits of sharing these experiences of both good research experiences and traumatic or bad research experiences.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, that's something that also helps. That, I mean, you can empathize with those situations, which mean you become even more aware of the inevitability of something happening that you didn't expect.
And ultimately, better prepared.
Yeah. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. Papa, what kind of jokes are allowed during quarantine?
I don't know, James. What kind of jokes are allowed during quarantine?
In jokes.